to before we return on Tri-City Sports Now. First of all, I got to sum this up. There was, somebody asked, Tee Martin and Kelly Harper, when she was Kelly Jolly, were both down in Knoxville back late 90s when they were both winning national titles. By the way, I'm Mark E. Bilson. This is Tri-City Sports Now. And Tee Martin mentioned, and by the way, I've interviewed Tee Martin. I like him a lot. He mentioned that they would get together at times and complain about how they're treated. Oh, Phil Fulmer's too tough on us. Oh, Pat Summitt's too tough on us thing. Because there's this big thing about, what has been really bothering me? I've actually heard people talk about, oh, Kelly Harper, I'm glad they hired her. If she doesn't think the stare is worth 2 cents. The fact we're underpaying our basketball coaches at Tennessee, no, that has nothing to do with the demise of the Lady Vols. The fact that the coach can't stare. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry I ever thought that there could have been another reason for the demise of the Lady Vol. Holly Warlick didn't, manipulate her eyes the way that Pat Summitt, and you'll see how Kelly Harper will do it. Anyway, but no, as we say that, the idea of the modern day athlete, and I do wonder this about especially women's basketball players, can you get away with some of the, lack of individuality and appreciation for individuality that maybe you could 20 years ago or 40 years ago or what have you? Now that transferring is far more, especially in basketball, far more popular. There isn't, certainly if you're a grad transfer, if you transfer to a smaller school, you don't have to sit out, so there are some advantages. And remember, and we've had Julio Cruz on this show. He's now a broadcaster for the Seattle Mariners. He used to be the manager of the Pulaski Rangers, now the Pulaski Yankees, in the Appalachian League, which is why we would have him on a show here in the Tri-Cities, so Julio Cruz. And, Julio Cruz, the year he managed Pulaski, was the manager of the year in the Appalachian League. And I was calling play-by-play of the Appy League then, and I was very impressed with him, and that's why I wanted to reconnect with him on this show. And I remember, he had great... Let me just ask you this. And he always thought about that. He remembered, did Julio Cruz, how he was treated as a player. He remembered what he liked, what he didn't like. And I remember asking him about pregame strategy. So, when might you call for pinch hitters or something? And he tells me, you know what? I don't call for pinch hitters. I'm like, really? You're a baseball manager? So, yeah, I know. I don't call for pinch hitters. I got the DH. I don't have to bat for the pitcher. All that curveball, and it's a curveball pitcher. Well, you're not going to be able to hit the curveball and make the major leagues if I don't give you the chance to do so. And what I remember is I was the Johnson City Cardinals broadcaster, and the Pulaski Rangers swept the Cardinals. And they did so in 3 games. Hitting 157, he had the 9th inning base hit to win the ball game. It worked, not because he was doing something with analytics, because he was doing something with people. He remembered how he liked to be treated as a player, and therefore he treated his players like that. Now, I don't know if that's what Tee Martin, and for that matter, Kelly Harper, are going to do down in Tennessee. However, I would think that if Tee Martin is revealing articulate coaches like Tee Martin, legends, if you will, talk to the media, it not only helps with branding, but it shows an insight. And you know what? If Tee Martin is willing to, when someone asks him about Kelly Harper, remember that, and, well, don't you think that we'll have to wait and see how it works out if they do that? But I think that was a positive sign that came out that night of all of spring practice. We could discuss, there is one conversation, it's a lot of football stuff today, talking about spring. I want to get to the Masters here, but also in our next segment, I want to talk a little bit about hockey. And ran it in for a touchdown. He isn't going to beat out Ty. We hope that he. What else do we got here regarding the? And then we can sort of close out, I guess, the Vols here. Both in terms of budgets and finances and all of that to the University of Tennessee. So there you have that. Speaking on hoopdirt.com, did you catch a coaching job and that Steve Forbes is an ancillary candidate, although far from a leading one up at Tennessee now that Mick Cronin has gone on to coach at UCLA? Well, here are some thoughts right here. Tennessee might not be done losing assistant coaches because at Kennesaw State, they are close to wrapping up their search, according to Adam Nelson. And who are the candidates? Also is Vols assistant Desmond Oliver. Those are the top two. So it's possible Rick Barnes could lose two people off of his staff to head coaching positions this year. How will that affect the Vols? I always thought that when Murray Bartow lost Mike Boyd and his coaching staff went through an upheaval at the end of his career, it didn't work well for him. And 64-year-old coach, interesting, we're going to have an up-and-coming coach on his staff. Or, when you've got veteran AD, will he go more of a veteran route? We'll have to wait and see. Of course, we'll have to wait and even see if Oliver gets the Kennesaw State job, but he is a Kentucky. We mentioned that Northern Kentucky's John Brannon is the front runner at Cincinnati, and they says, not that you can make book on it, but it wouldn't be a bad bet to say that Brannon, the head coach of the Norse, who actually did defeat ETSU a couple of years ago, and then ETSU beat him again in the rematch. But anyway, Northern Kentucky's coach, real front runner at Cincinnati. What else should we know that has a local interest? Lamar associate head coach Bobby Clemmer. This isn't a big story, but he's in the mix to join the new staff at Mercer. Southern Conference story. If you really know your local basketball, you may know that Bobby Clemmer, Kummr, has been with Lamar for the last 4 seasons, the Cardinals they're called. That means that I guess Scott Padgett would have been there as well. Worked at Texas A&M. What else? Oh, Emory and Henry. Let's talk about them. D3 Emory and Henry is down to 2 finalists for their job. One is VMI assistant Kevin Carroll, and the other is a current D3 head coach who is unnamed. So they might bring in a VMI assistant to Emory and Henry. Interviews will wrap up early next week. Intriguing. Very intriguing. So that's the case right there. When we come back, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight on the hockey playoffs. They begin tonight, and then